Hey guys, welcome back. Today's lesson is going to be over ratios and rates. Our objective today is that we will be able to solve ratio and rate problems using unit rates with fractions and calculate unit prices. And we'll talk about some of these terms and what they mean. So the first one is a ratio. A ratio is just a set of numbers that associates two or more quantities. So I've got you an example here. The ratio of students to teachers on the field trip was 8 to 1. You read that colon as the word to. So that just means there were 8 students to every one teacher on the trip. A rate is associated with a ratio, so they're kind of very similar. And we read that such as A to B, written as a rate. We also read it as A over B, which is kind of like a fraction. And the example for that one is 3 pounds of grapes cost $6, which is a rate of $2 per pound. Now, that leads us right into a unit rate because you notice that it is per pound, meaning 1 pound. It might be per mile, per anything really, per package. It's just a comparison to 1. And a unit rate is the number of units of the first quantity, whatever that quantity may be, in a ratio for every 1 unit of the second quantity, whatever that quantity might be. So whenever you see that 1 in the denominator, you will recognize that as your unit rate. Anytime you've got a 1 in the denominator of your fraction, the denominator being the bottom part of your fraction. So the example for this one, a lot of us should be able to relate to. It says for the rate of 55 miles per hour, the unit rate is 55, meaning there are 55 miles traveled per every 1 hour. So that is a unit rate again because that second quantity, or that denominator of your fraction, is representing 1 of whatever that quantity might be, and in this example that would be hours. Okay, so for our first problem, we're going to write 3 ratios that are equivalent to the one given. And it says the ratio of coffee lovers to tea lovers is 10 to 4. So our coffee lovers, which was written first in our ratio, goes with this first number, 10. And then our second one was tea lovers, which goes with our number 4. So to write that as a fraction to start out, we're going to write 10 over 4, and that was 10 coffee. I'm just going to put a C for coffee. You can put whatever you want. And 4 for tea lovers. So we want to write 3 ratios here. Okay, so we want 3 different answers to get us there. We have to make sure, because sometimes it's only asking for 1, and we overlook that it's asking us for 3. So one way to find this is we notice that this fraction of 10 to 4, 10 over 4, could be simplified. Most of you are familiar with simplifying fractions by now. So ask yourself what number goes into 10 and 4 both. And since they are both even numbers, we know that they're both divisible by the number 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So 5 over 2 would be one equivalent ratio to 10 over 4. Now, we still need 2 more to complete this problem. So we cannot simplify 5 over 2 anymore. So instead of dividing this time, we're going to need to multiply. Now, we don't want to multiply by 2 because that's going to put us right back over here where we started with the 10 over 4. So we don't want to multiply by 2. However, let's try multiplying by, say, 3. And it doesn't have to be 3. You could choose any number. We could spend the rest of our day coming up with equivalent fractions to 10 over 4. So if we do 5 times 3, that gives us 15. And 2 times 3 gives us 6. So there is a second equivalent fraction. Now, instead of just multiplying each of these numbers that we're coming up with, like here in number 1 or in number 2, we could keep multiplying those fractions, but we can also go back over here to our 10 over 4. And we can multiply that one even by 3 or by 30 or by 300, whatever number we want to choose, because it's going to always give us an equivalent fraction. So in this case, we have 10 times 3, which is 30, and 4 times 3, which is 12. So there is a third equivalent fraction. So 5 over 2, 15 over 6, and 30 over 12 are all equivalent fractions or equivalent ratios to 10 to 4. Again, there is an endless number of answers to this problem. Everyone in a class of 30 people could have a different answer, and everyone be correct. So as long as you're multiplying the top number and the bottom number by the same number, or dividing the top number and the bottom number by the same number, you will continue to get equivalent ratios. Now let's work on finding the unit rate for each relationship. Okay, so the first thing you have to think is, what is a unit rate? The directions are asking you to find a unit rate, so you've got to know what a unit rate is. And if you remember, we talked about on the vocabulary slide that a unit rate is where we had a 1 in our denominator, or our second quantity was representing 1 of something. So let's try this one, for example. We have 320 miles in 5 hours. So the first thing you want to do is write that as a rate, or as a fraction. So 320, I'm going to put an M for miles, in 5 hours. Now again, we're looking for a unit rate, which means we want 1 in our denominator. So in other words, we're looking for how many miles is 1 hour. So you can see that we filled in both of our denominators, and we're lacking this number up here, x, in our numerator. So we need to solve for this x. So how did we go from 5 down to 1 here in the denominator? Well, we know that 5 divided by 5 equals 1. And it's important to know the multiplicative inverse means we could also multiply by 5's reciprocal. Okay, so what I mean by that is the number 5, when you take the reciprocal, it is 1 over 5. Okay, because that still gives us 1. So for any number, 2/3, its reciprocal will be 3/2, or 3 over 2. 1/3, the reciprocal would be 3, or 3 over 1 if you want to write it as a fraction. So it's important to know that dividing by 5 is the same as multiplying by 1/5. So in this case, since we have a whole number up here in our numerator, it's going to be much easier to stick with this divide by 5. Okay, so we're going to divide by 5 on the top as well. So we're solving this division problem right here. 320 divided by 5 to figure out what x equals. So 320 divided by 5. Now we know that 5 doesn't go into 3, so 5 goes into 32. Ask yourself, how many times does 5 go into 32? Or 5 times what will get us as close to 32 as possible without going over, which is 6. 6 multiplied by the divisor 5 gives us 30. We subtract and get 2. We've still got this 0 here that we have to bring down. 5 goes into 20 4 times, and 4 times 5 is 20, and no remainder. So that means in this case that x equals 64. In other words, there are 64 miles per meaning 1 hour. And this is a unit rate because of that per hour, because that means 1 hour. If you are writing these notes down, you might want to pause your video just for a second to finish your writing, as I will clear this one before we start our next one. Okay, so 68 pages read in 40 minutes. Again, you're going to start out with your rate. okay, writing that rate as a fraction. So 68, I'm going to put P for pages, 68 pages in 40 minutes. And since we are solving still for that unit rate, we're wanting to know the number of pages in 1 minute. So in this case, again, we have our denominators filled in, so we're going from 40 down to 1. So ask yourself, 40 divided by what gives us 1? Well, we know that 40 divided by 40, because any number divided by itself gives us 1. Or we could multiply by that 40's reciprocal, which would be 1 over 40. That will be really important in the future slides, so stay with me on that, why I'm putting that multiply by 140. So since we have a whole number 68 here on top, it's much easier to just stick with this divide by 40. So we're going to divide by 40 on the top. So we'll set up our division. 68 divided by 40. And 40 does not go into 6, but it does go into 68 one time. 1 times 40 is 40. And we have 28 left over. Now, used to, we could say that we had one remainder 28. But in 7th grade, we can't do that. So in order to keep our division going, we have to put a decimal and a 0. And don't forget to go ahead and bring that decimal up to your quotient so you don't forget to put it in there later. Bring down your 0. 40 into 280. So you may need to go out to the side and multiply a few times to figure out what multiplied by 40 gives us 280. You may also recognize that 4 times 7 is 28. So therefore, 40 times 7 is 280. And we subtract and get 0. So our quotient here of 1.7 tells us that there are 1.7 pages that are being read per minute. And again, why is this a unit rate? Well, because of this per minute, because it is our second quantity, pages to minutes, and that second quantity of minutes is being represented by the number 1. Okay, why don't you pause your video just for a minute and go ahead and try to solve this third one. Let's see if you can do this one on your own. We have $27 for 12 avocados. So since you're solving for that unit rate, just remember you're trying to solve for the price of 1 avocado because you want that second quantity to be 1. So pause your video to give yourself a chance to solve that. Okay, let's try C. So we have $27 for 12 avocados. And we want to know the cost per avocado, which means for 1. So to go from 12 down to 1, we would be dividing by 12. Or multiplying by 1/12, because that is the reciprocal. Since we have a whole number, let's stick with our whole number of dividing by 12. And we're going to do 27 divided by 12. So we know that 12 goes into 27 2 times, which is 24, with 3 left over. But again, we can't have those remainders, so we've got to do a decimal, 0, and bring our decimal up to our quotient as well. Bring down your 0. 12 goes into 30 2 times. 2 times 12 is 24. And we still have 6 left over, so we still have to keep going. So you may have to extend that line a little. And 12 goes into 60 5 times. And 5 times 12 is 60. So we finally get that 0 remainder. So we get 2.25, which means that it costs $2.25 per avocado. Okay, let's look at some word problems to also help us on this one. Using her garden hose, Camilla filled up a 4-gallon bucket in just 1/6 of a minute. At what rate does water flow through the hose? And as you can see here with this blank that we have for our answer, we are solving for the gallons per minute. So we know that this per minute, since we're working with unit rates, we want that second quantity to be 1, which means we're going to put gallons on the top and minutes on the bottom. So back up here in our word problem, we can see that our rate was 4 gallons in 1/6 of a minute. So again, we are still solving for the number of gallons, as you can see in the blank there. So blank gallons per minute, which means 1 minute. That word per means 1. Okay, so how do we go from 1/6 to 1? Well, we go from 1/6 to 1 by either dividing by itself, because we know that any number divided by itself gives us 1, or we can multiply, like we were talking earlier, by the reciprocal. So 1/6, let's look over here, 1/6 times by the reciprocal means we just flip that fraction over, which is 6 over 1, or just the number 6. Because 1 times 6 is 6, and 6 times 1 is 6, so that is 1 whole. So we can divide by 1/6, or we can multiply by 6. Now, since we're multiplying one of these two numbers, dividing by 1/6 or multiplying by 6, which one is it going to be easiest to do up here with the 4? Which is going to be easier? Would you rather do 4 divided by 1/6 or just 4 times 6? Obviously, multiplying by just a whole number would be much easier. So 4 times 6 is 24. So this second rate here is giving us our answer, that would be 24 gallons per minute. Next question. With some species of bamboo, you can actually see them grow. You could observe 30 centimeters of growth in just 1/3 of a day. At what rate does this bamboo grow? And down here in our answer, we can see we're solving for centimeters per day. So we want days obviously represented on the bottom. So we will have centimeters and days and centimeters and days. So let's look up here in our problem. We've got 30 centimeters, so we're going to plug that in on the top. And then we have 1/3 of a day, so we're going to plug that in on the bottom. And of course, we're solving for this per day, which is 1. So how do we go here on our denominators from 1/3 to 1? Well, we know that any number divided by itself would give us 1. So dividing by 1/3 would give us 1. Or we could multiply by that 1/3's reciprocal. So when we take 1/3 and we flip it over, we get 3 over 1, which is the same as just 3. So ask yourself, is it easier to do 30 divided by 1/3 or 30 times 3? I think most of us are going to choose that it's much easier to just do 30 times 3. I think most of you can do that in your head, but you can always set you up a multiplication problem over here to the side. 3 times 0 is 0, and 3 times 3 is 9. So we get 90 centimeters per day. So go ahead and pause your video right now, and let's let you try this one and see if you can get the correct answer before I solve this problem with you. So go ahead and pause your video and attempt to solve this problem, and then we will work it out. Okay, so a teacher's assistant entered 10 scores into the online gradebook in 1/5 of an hour. We are wanting to know how many scores she entered per hour, meaning 1 hour. So 1/5 to 1, we can do that by any number. Once again, divided by itself gives us 1. So we could divide by 1/5, or we can multiply by the reciprocal of that, which would be 5 over 1, or just 5. So ask yourself, is it easier to do 10 divided by 1/5 or 10 times 5? And most of us would say multiply it by 5. 10 times 5 is 50. So this rate tells us that she could enter 50 scores in that 1 hour, or 50 scores per hour. Go ahead and pause your video once again and attempt to solve this problem before we do it together. Okay, a school janitor has mopped 1/3 of a classroom in 5 minutes. At what rate is he mopping? So we can see that we're comparing the classrooms per minute. So we want that per minute to be on the bottom. So when we set up our rate, we're doing classrooms to minutes. And we'll set up our first rate over here on the left-hand side using, what is the number of classrooms? Well, we see up here in our problems that he had done 5 minutes, he had mopped 1/3 of a classroom. So 1/3 of a classroom in 5 minutes. And we're wanting to solve for how many classrooms, so X number of classrooms per minute, meaning 1 minute. So how do we go from 5 down to 1? Well, again, we can divide by itself. Any number divided by itself gives us 1. Or we can multiply by the reciprocal of that. So remember that 5 over 1 is the same as 5. So its reciprocal would be 1/5. So we can multiply by 1/5. So ask yourself, is it easier to do 1/3 divided by 5 or 1/3 times 1/5? Well, if you remember, when you divide fractions, you do what you all remember as keep, change, flip. So really, we're skipping that keep, change, flip when we just go ahead and start with multiplying by 1/5. So my advice would be, if your numerator here of 1/3 is a fraction, if that numerator is a fraction, then it's going to be a whole lot easier to multiply by the fraction rather than divide by the whole number, because you're going to end up down here with multiply by 1/5 anyway. So we have 1/3 times 1/5. And when we're multiplying fractions, we don't have to worry about a common denominator or anything. We just multiply straight across. So 1 times 1 is 1, and 3 times 5 is 15. So that means that in 1 minute, the janitor is mopping 1/15 of a classroom. Because of course, we all know that the janitor cannot completely mop an entire classroom in 1 minute. So obviously he's going to need, based on this problem, about 15 minutes per classroom. Now we're switching to unit prices. However, a unit price is just like a unit rate. The only difference is we're talking about money to purchase one of something instead of comparing two different quantities, although it's still quantities because we're comparing the dollars to something, whatever that something is that you're buying. Okay, so in this one we have a 7-ounce jar of modeling clay, cost $1.26. So we're looking for the unit price. So let's set up that rate that we've been setting up in every problem. We know that for $1.26, we purchased a 7-ounce jar. And we want to know the cost in dollars per ounce. So there's our unit rate still with that ounce on the bottom, that per ounce. Okay, so how do we go from 7 to 1? Well, we divide by itself, right? 7 divided by 7 would give us 1. Or we can multiply by 1/7, which is its reciprocal. Now, obviously, you do not want to try to divide a decimal, multiply a decimal by a fraction. So in this case, we definitely want to keep our whole number of dividing by 7. So we're going to come out here to the side, and we're going to do 1.26, and we're going to divide it by 7. Now, don't forget to bring that decimal that's in your dividend up to your quotient, or you might forget to put it in there, and that's going to make your answer wrong. So will 7 go into 1? It will not. So we're going to put our 0 placeholder there, especially since we're dealing with money. Will 7 go into 12? It will go 1 time. 1 times 7 is 7. We subtract and we've got 5 left over. We're going to bring down our 6. 7 goes into 56 8 times, and 7 times 8 is 56 with none left over. So our quotient up here, which is 0.18, is telling us that cost, this modeling clay, cost 18 cents per ounce. Okay, go ahead and take just a minute, pause your video, and try to solve this problem. A 3-pack of t-shirts cost $8.94, so we're looking for the unit price, or in other words, we're looking for the cost per t-shirt. So we know that it cost $8.94 for 3 t-shirts. We want to know the cost per t-shirt, or for 1 t-shirt. So to go from 3 down to 1, we can divide by 3, or that is the same as multiplying by a third, but of course we're going to want to use our whole number 3 since we're dividing with a decimal. So we have $8.94 divided by 3. Bring that quotient, that decimal up to your quotient, and 3 will go into 8 2 times. 2 times 3 is 6. Subtract and give us 2. Bring down our 9. 3 goes into 29 9 times, because 3 times 9 is 27 with 2 left over. And we're going to bring down our 4. And 3 will go into 24 8 times, and 3 times 8 is 24, so we get that 0 remainder. So our quotient of 298 tells us that it costs $2.98 per t-shirt. Okay, in this one, we're choosing which is the better buy. So if we still set this up with the dollars on top, let's set this up with 4-pack over here, and we'll compare the 5-pack over here. So we're going to set this up still with our dollars on top. So that means we're finding the cost per pack. So if you're getting 1 pack of the same exact thing, you obviously want to pay the cheaper amount, right? You're getting the same exact thing regardless which amount you pay. So you want to save as much money as you can. So you would choose the least amount. So let's set up our first rate over here for our 4-pack. We know that it costs $1.96 for this 4-pack of erasers. And we need to know, well, how much are we paying for each eraser? Okay, so we went from 4 down to 1, which we would divide by 4 or multiply by 1/4, but in this case we're going to keep it with divide by 4. So we're going to have $1.96 divided by 4. 4 will not go into 1, so we know that we're paying less than $1 for each eraser. 4 goes into 19. How many times? 4 times, because 4 times 4 is 16, with 3 left over. And we're going to bring down our 6. So then we ask, 4 goes into 36 9 times, because 4 times 9 is 36. So in the 4-pack, we're paying 49 cents for each eraser. Now let's set up our same one over here with our 5-pack. So we were paying $2.05 for 5 erasers. And we still need to know, well, how much are we paying for just one of those erasers? So to go from 5 down to 1, we're dividing by 5. So we're going to divide by 5 on the top. So we have $2.05 divided by 5. Don't forget to bring that decimal up. 5 will not go into 2, so we're going to put a 0 as our placeholder there. 5 goes into 20 4 times, because 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract and we get 0. Now, be very careful here because a lot of people want to stop and say 0.4. But we've still got this 5 that has to come down. So 5 will go into 5 one time, and 5 times 1 is 5. And this time we get 0, but we don't have any more numbers in our dividend to be brought down. So this tells us that we are paying 41 cents for each eraser if we purchase the 5-pack. So ask yourself, would you rather be paying for the 4-pack, which means you're paying 49 cents for each eraser, or would you rather purchase the 5-pack where you're paying 41 cents for each eraser? So no matter what, you're getting one eraser. So which one is the better deal for you, to pay 49 cents for it or to pay 41 cents for it? Well, of course, 41 cents is cheaper than 49 cents. So in this case, it would be cheaper to purchase the 5-pack. That would be the better deal for what you are getting. Okay, go ahead and pause your video and try this problem on your own. Okay, so we know it costs $7.65 for a 9-pack of candles. And as you can see here where this blank is set up for our answer, we are wanting to know the cost for just one candle. So how do we go from 9 down to 1? Well, we divide it by itself. So we're going to do the same on the top. So we're going to have 765 divided by 9. 9 goes into 7 0 times, and 9 goes into 76 8 times, because 8 times 9 is 72. We subtract and we have 4 left over. We bring down our 5. 9 goes into 45 5 times, and 5 times 9 is 45. And we get the remainder of 0. So our quotient here of 0.85 tells us that it costs 85 cents per candle. Go ahead and take just a minute and try to solve this problem. So we can see that it costs 60 cents for a 5-pack of marbles. We're wanting to know the cost for just one marble. Okay, so to go from 5 down to 1, we divide 5 by itself and divide by 5 on the top. So we have 0.60 divided by 5. We know that 5 will not go into 0, but 5 will go into 6 one time, which is 5. We subtract and we have 1 left over. We bring down our 0, and 5 will go into 10 2 times, and 2 times 5 is 10. So our quotient of 0.12 is telling us that it costs 12 cents per marble. That completes today's instructional video. Please click on the link that will take you to your exit slip. Remember, you want to do that exit slip first. That way you can see if you're getting the hang of things before you go into that assessment, which is going to count as your grade. So complete your exit slip first, which can be found on forms, and then you will complete your assessment on forms. Now, when you take that assessment, there's a few of the questions, actually about 8 of the questions of the 10 that I have to go back in and manually grade. So if it tells you make a 20, don't panic. Come back and check it a little bit later after I've had an opportunity to go in and grade those and check your score. So don't panic if you see that really low score. That's just because I have to go back in and grade some of those questions. Have a good evening.